This light fighter jet is unlike any other ever designed. It's shaped like a UFO. It's actually got such a cutting-edge idea that in the Soviet Union, it beat all competition as the next generation of fighter aircraft. But then something happened that made it lost to history. If you're anything like me and you love deep diving into aviation history, then you probably stumbled upon this photo of a random Russian jet. It was named the MiG-I-2000 and it's often mentioned online as a Russian light fighter project from the early 2000s, simply as another paper project that never saw the light of day. But stick with me today to hear the true story behind it, the mind of a brilliant engineer, how his beloved country failed him, and how the Iranians got their hands on one of the most prospective concepts of 90s Russia aviation. This is the story of the Mohammadov Bureau and its Project Integral. Like all stories, it starts way back in the 1960s. A young engineer by the name of Faruk or Faradin Mohammadov from Tajikistan, that was part of the Soviet Union, was studying in Riga when some of his colleagues formed a student aircraft design bureau. And if you're sitting there at home scratching your head already with all these names, don't worry, I'll explain that later because there's actually a story behind it. At the time, it was next to impossible to have a chance of designing your own aircraft because it was the job of the motherland's most famous bureaus like MiG, Tupolev or Sukhoi who actually made fighter aircraft. But this young man and his fellow students had a dream, and they knew that the only way that they could actually sit down and come up with a new type of fighter aircraft would be to think completely outside of the box. And it's this idea that he kept with him as he worked his way through numerous projects during the 70s and 80s, waiting for his chance to propose one of his radical student ideas. And he would get that when the Soviet Union started to look around for a new jet trainer aircraft to replace its aging Il-39. By thinking outside of the box, he actually thought up and proposed a daring new design that would have a completely new wing, something that would bear his name into the future. And this aircraft was inspired, of course, by the UFO. Up to that point, there were several unconventional wing types experimented upon throughout the years. There's your basic regular wing design, then there's the swept wing, the delta wing, the forward swept wing, and then there's the famous flying saucer or circular wing design. Of course, this concept wasn't new and it had been explored by the Nazis before and during World War II, and then after the war, Avro Canada actually built a flying prototype of a flying disc, but it never worked out. So subscribe if you want to see a video about that one. But it was actually the Americans that got the furthest. They tried to modify this design a bit and make it somewhat more aerodynamic with the Vought V173, or Flying Pancake as I like to call it, which you can watch a video all about it here on the channel. But none of these designs were good enough to actually fly in a real combat scenario or be applied in civil aviation. There was one important key factor missing: fly-by-wire controls. With the 70s and 80s, fly-by-wire or digital controls were suddenly gaining popularity in both civil and military aviation, and they made possible all kinds of weird designs. So the hero of our story went to the drawing board with this impossible shape in mind. A circular wing would allow for way slower stall speeds compared to the regular wing design, allow for a much higher angle of attack and maneuvers, and create more lift due to a larger wing area. This would mean that the plane would be superior in dogfights and be able to go toe-to-toe against the West no matter what they threw at it. But of course, the circular wing also had its flaws. The Vought 173, for example, would act as a giant air brake at a high angle of attack, so during landings and takeoffs, there was a significant chance of crashing, and the control surfaces weren't large enough to properly control the aircraft. So our protagonist came up with an idea to fix all of this. He integrated a standard swept wing into the circular base, all while keeping the fuselage itself pretty standard with horizontal and vertical stabilizers and intakes integrated into the circular part of the wing. And the name was born, the UTS Integral. In 1991, he submitted a somewhat modified design proposal through the local MiG bureau in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, where he was living and working at the time. MiG was actually very impressed with the concept, so not only would it present its main idea, the MiG-AT, it would also present the UTS Integral as part of its program. The jet now had intakes below the circular part of the wing in the similar manner as the Yak 130, a larger canopy and less canted vertical stabilizers. MiG would go on to start doing some wind tunnel testing where the Integral proved to be better than its original competition in several tests, and thus it was granted the equivalent of $2 million for a first full-size mock-up. It looked like that for our protagonist that everything was going his way, and all those hard years of grinding against the stone and being in the student societies had finally paid off. Unfortunately, something else would happen that year. The USSR would fall apart, and in 1992 a disastrous civil war would strike Tajikistan, which would last for a further 5 years. The dream of the Integral was over. Well, sort of, because you can't keep a good idea down. Even though he had lost funding, job, and had to flee the country with his family, there was a new player on the market who was very interested in his work: Iran. He did a patent of his design for both the wing and the light fighter concept in 1992 under the name of Fakhreddin Mohammadov. And that's where the curious name issue comes up that I mentioned at the start. His autobiographical book, The Aerospace Engineer of the 21st Century, was signed under the name of Farouk. It's hard to say what's the truth. Was it his son or brother that released this book? I don't know. Anyway, let's continue on with the story. He was previously working on a proposal of a new transport aeroplane for the Iranians, which fell through, but the Iranians kept in contact with him and wanted him to bring his ideas for a new light fighter jet. And wouldn't you know it, he had the perfect idea. They funded a full-size mock-up based on his design, and the new light fighter, Shafag, was born in 1998. To come up with this new insane aircraft design, you need the best of the best when it comes to writing tools, and it doesn't get any better than winning one of the best inventions of 2022 from Time magazine. That's right, I'm talking about the hover pen from Novium, today's video sponsor. These hover pens are timeless, great to use, refillable, and sit at 23.5 degrees, the same as planet Earth. Yes, that's right, the pen's just floating there. You can actually spin it around on its axis, which is a lot of fun. But it gets seriously cool. The Interstellar Edition HoloPens come in a range of colors, but one of the special colors of the HoloPens has real meteorite shard inside of it, meaning it's 4.56 billion years old, and possibly the oldest thing you'll ever touch in your entire life. Damn. Honestly, the hover pen is the perfect gift, and I'm going to be giving one to my father on his birthday soon. So to celebrate and to reward fans of the channel, Novium is also giving 10% off all hover pens and free shipping to most countries. So be sure to check them out for someone special, or maybe just for yourself. I've got all the links down in the description. The Shafag was considered in two variants. There would be a light attack aircraft version and a trainer for fighter pilots, with the first flight planned for 2008. But this would look almost identical to the 3D model that you see here today, except it would have two seats. Around the same time, Mohammadov caught wind that the new Russian Air Force was looking for a light attack aircraft. The design of the previous Integral concept was slightly changed and submitted. It would have a smaller F-22 style canopy and vertical stabilizers following the original wing design, and two AL-31F engines, the same ones as the Su-27, giving this light jet a lot of power. In total, there'd also be 8 hardpoints for weapons, plus one additional fuel tank or targeting pod along with a larger nose to accommodate the radar, which would make this jet much bigger threat than the MiG-29. As stealth was very quickly becoming all the rage, the radar cross-section was reduced with canted stabilizers, S-ducts for the engines, and an overall design choices like a flat exhaust nozzles, diamond-shaped wings, and an alternative internal weapons bay configuration that could hold up to 4 missiles. So this new light fighter was quite the weapon. In the US, the Jane's Defense Weekly picked up on this project and published an article in 1998 incorrectly calling it the LFI MiG I-2000. But this jet was never a bid for the failed LFI program, nor was it designed by MiG, and even the name was incorrect. It was actually called the Integral 2010 LBS, or Light Combat Aircraft. Unfortunately, there was still no one to hear the ideas of Mr. Mohammadov in the Russian government. Despite everything that had happened and even his prior history of being pretty much a genius when it came to aircraft development, the Russian government still turned to Sukhoi, MiG, and its fellow big aerospace firms. So once again, Mr. Mohammadov had to return to the Iranian government. It's actually quite hilarious when you realize at this point just how many times Mr. Mohammadov recycled the same aircraft design. Because the next concept for the Iranians was actually based off the Integral 2010, but it changed to a single RD-33 engine which would make it available for the Iranians. After all, they didn't have access to the Russian AL-31F. The cockpit nose section and intakes were changed to resemble a Super Hornet, and the radar cross-section was second place with its simplicity and price being pushed forward. So any of those fancy smancy radar reduction technologies were abandoned. However, due to the various sanctions and even Russians raiding his offices because they didn't like that Farouk was working with the Iranians over them, this project was never pushed further than the design and scale model phase. Pretty much at this point, Russia said you either work for us or you work for nobody, and that's exactly what he did. His last concept was aimed at the new PAC-FAR program. It was the year 2000 and MiG was slowly falling behind Sukhoi with the constant delays and failure of their MiG MFI, better known as the MiG 1.44 jet. It was apparent that a new program would need to be started for a 5th generation fighter for the Russian Air Force, and Mohammadov was right there banging on the door, screaming that he had the idea the entire time. Vityaz 2000, or Night 2000, was to be his magnum opus. After analysing the JSF, or more precisely the F-35 development, he designed a new jet around his integral wing design, but with stealth being the '1 priority. The wings were once again slightly more swept back, with part of the circular wing serving as a steerable LERX, just like the Su-57 has today. The intakes were also redesigned the same way as the F-35, with a DSI bump removing the need for a complicated air intake ramps. All of the weaponry was then located inside the fuselage and the engine nozzles were hidden between the canted vertical stabilizers. This would be powered by the mighty AL-41F from the MiG MFI, which was designed for supercruise, so both the maximum speed and supercruise speed was to surpass the F-35. With a 12-meter wingspan and 15 meters in length, it would put it in the same size category as the F-35, but if they went toe-to-toe, this aircraft would absolutely dominate it. But this new 5th generation jet wasn't to be a light multi-role one, but a heavy air dominance fighter just like the F-22. And next to a bureau like Sukhoi, a small no-name company had no chance in winning the contract. And I hate to say this for like the 5th time in the video, but at the end of the day, the powers that be decided to go with a name brand that they knew, and probably who was putting money in their pockets. So this aircraft concept as well just remained a drawing on paper. So that's the real story behind that weird circular jet aircraft from Russia and the tale of a man who just couldn't get his ideas heard. It's been a concept of many names, promised so much, but never really stood a chance against the giants like MiG, Sukhoi, and Yakovlev. There is a footnote to this story that in 2010, Mahamadov proposed one last design, a stealthy unmanned jet based off the 90s Iranian proposal. Something that would actually be a real hit nowadays, with many countries trying to develop their own such aircraft. However, he would pass away in 2013, and with him, his dreams of an integral wing, now called Mahamadov Wing Design. Was he just so much ahead of his time, or was this idea never going to work at all and we could all see straight through it? Do let me know down in the comments, and I hope you enjoy this video. And boy, I feel like we're just getting started, because he had a whole civil aviation career where he came up with some incredibly insane aircraft concepts that would have been better than anything Airbus or Boeing would make. So if you want to see that one, make sure you stay subscribed, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey, don't forget that we've got 10% off hover pens for fans of Found and Explained. The links are down below in the description.